Hello, my name is Paul-Gregory. I write for Mental Aikido as well as for Watchdog Wire and several other new media outlets out there. And Franklin Center as well as the Watchdog Wire asked me to do a little presentation on I am the First Amendment. I am one alpha. So I agreed to give a couple of minutes blurb real quick about the First Amendment and what it means to me. Real quick, I just want to review the First Amendment. For those of you who have never actually looked at it or heard it before, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So that's a lot of stuff in one short little, one long sentence or short paragraph there. And basically it comes down to we the people have given the government all these rules and everything on what they can and cannot do. And in the first 10 amendments, we list out these are the things that under no circumstances are you to ever do. These are ours. We do not give you the authority to do these. And the First Amendment covers a whole bunch of things. It covers religion. It says that the government cannot tell you what religion you must be. Now remember back in the colonial days, we had the Church of England is what was back in Britain, and then a bunch of people didn't want to be part of the Church of England, so they fled and came to America. We had Quakers, we had Puritans, etc., etc. So that comes out of there and says there will be no one religion or one sect of the religion or any religion that is over the entire United States. On the flip side, the government, at the same time as they can't tell you you must be a religion, they can't stop you from worshiping whatever religion it is, be it Christianity, Catholicism, Islam, Druidry, or even atheism, which is the religion of no gods. So they can't do anything about that. Also, it says that Congress, as well as the rest of the government, can't abridge other freedoms like speech and the press. Well, this whole campaign, this I Am the First Amendment campaign, came down because of Senator Dianne Feinstein and a bunch of her friends and colleagues and associates in Washington and also in certain state-level legislatures decided they didn't like the way the new media was catching them saying certain things at certain town hall meetings and then using it against them. So they started saying, well, the freedom of the press only applies to licensed journalists and official journalists. Well, next thing you know is people start asking her, who licenses journalists? Where does that come from? So she proposed a bill in the Senate, and then a similar one's been proposed in the U.S. Congress and the U.S. House of Representatives, making it a legal issue for the federal government to license journalists. Well, first of all, freedom of the press is not just journalism. Most people think it's just about journalism in the news. It covers anything that is published. It covered Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, even though that was written long before the Constitution. It was written before the Revolution even started. It was one of the things, the precursors to it. But Common Sense by Thomas Paine was not a news story. It was a philosophical essay, so to speak. It covers any published material, what be it opinion or facts or fiction. And freedom of speech goes along with it because it's instead of published work, it's the publicly spoken, hi, I'm here, listen to me, aspect of the same kind of expressions. And it all relates, well, I shouldn't say all, but it primarily relates to speaking out about the government or government institutions. Not so much about talking about your neighbor. If you say my neighbor, dyes his hair green and eats toads, if it's true, yeah, you could say that, but if it's not, that's actually kind of against the law because you're telling lies about your neighbor. But that's not what the First Amendment is talking about. The First Amendment is talking, like I said, primarily about these other things that I already mentioned. And why the First Amendment is important, we can go through history and look at all sorts of examples. We can look at Hitler. We can look at King George. We could look at Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We can look at North Korea, dating back to the 1950s. We can look at, Siam, otherwise known as Vietnam. All sorts of different regimes where the freedom of the press has been limited by the government. You can always only say what the government tells you you're allowed to. I'm going to want to bring up one example that most people don't even consider these days. But back in the late 80s, there was a little bit of a dispute going on in a what's considered a relatively free country, South Africa. They had this thing called apartheid. And under apartheid, the majority of the citizens were actually held pretty, oppressively by what, turned out later to be discovered as a tyrannical government. But there's a man named Stephen Biko, and Stephen Biko liked to go out and talk to crowds and let them know, these are things that are going on. This is what's bad. This is how the government's hypocrites, blase this, blase that, and the government didn't like it too much. So they turned around and told him, you're not allowed to talk to people anymore. You're not allowed to publish books or opinions in the news. You're not even allowed to meet with more than a couple of people at a time. And if you're caught, well, we're going to throw you in jail because this is your current punishment and that's the next step. Biko didn't stop, eventually got thrown in jail. He died either, if you listen to the different sides of the story, he either died of a hunger strike or he was beaten to death in his jail cell because of who he was. Well, Mr. Biko had a really good friend who happened to not be of the same race, but was a journalist in South Africa, a man by the name of John Briley. John Briley, got to be good friends with Stephen Biko, went around, followed him around, and started writing a book about all the things Biko was doing, and wrote the book and continued all the way through to Biko's mysterious death. Well, he went to go publish it. South African government said, you're not going to publish this. And told him, you're not going to publish this. You're not going to publish any stories about it. In fact, the same thing we did to Biko before, we're doing to you now. You are not allowed to meet with more than X number of people. You're not allowed to publish, not allowed to speak. Well, he was a journalist, and all of a sudden he's told you can't be a journalist anymore. So John Briley packed up his manuscript and a few belongings and fled from South Africa. And eventually got someplace that had a freedom of the press, or at least something a little bit closer to it. And he published his book, a book by the name of Cry Freedom. Now, had John Briley not gotten someplace that allowed him his freedom of the press, his freedom to publish, a lot of things that were going on in South Africa with apartheid and everything would never have gotten the world view that it got. People wouldn't have known, and a tyrannical regime would have kept on going and oppressing a certain segment of the population. Happened to be, in that case, the majority of the population to boot. So the First Amendment is very, very important, be it the freedom of press or the freedom of speech. Publish it or say it out loud, as well as the freedom to gather in public and discuss things. Let's go have a rally and talk about, why we think this brand of grass is what should be in our homeowners association versus this brand. You have the freedom to do that, and you also have the freedom to petition the government for redress of grievances. I don't like this, dear Mr. Congressman, I don't like this law, and this is why I think it's a bad law. We're allowed to do that in our country. Now, saying that you have to have a license to be able to do that completely goes against the very foundation of our government and where we came from when we started. And that is why, for me, the First Amendment is very, very important. One other little key tidbit for those of you that don't know me is I served 24 years in the military, which meant I spent 24 years of my life dedicated to protecting and serving the Constitution. So I kind of hold it a little bit dear to my heart, not just because it enables what I do now, but because of what I and many of my colleagues sacrificed for that very right so that other people could have it. And the government doesn't give us our rights. They're our rights. The government doesn't give rights. It only takes them away. So, in retrospect, or to sum this up, just like every other U.S. citizen and every resident alien and every visiting dignitary and diplomat and every tourist that comes to our country, and most importantly back, just like every other citizen of our country, I am the First Amendment. Thank you. Have a great day.